This is Market Pathways, your premium guide to global medical device regulation, reimbursement, and policy. Become a part of the global MedTech community at mystrategist.com.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Market Pathways podcast. I'm Steve Levin, Editor-in-Chief of Market Pathways and MedTech Strategist. And in this session, we're going to replay a panel discussion from our recent Dublin Innovation Summit, focusing on changes in the Chinese MedTech market that present new opportunities for MedTech companies. The changes that have taken place in China in terms of the MedTech market over the last few years have been dramatic. If we were having this discussion just a few years ago, we would have been focusing on Chinese money investing in opportunities both in the U.S. and Europe. Recently, that's changed, and now most of the Chinese money is looking internally more so than externally. But there have been changes in the Chinese regulatory regimen that have made China an easier market for non-Chinese companies to enter, and the Chinese are taking steps to encourage non-Chinese companies, particularly those with innovative technologies, to break into the Chinese market, recognizing that China's native companies aren't able to develop this level of innovative technologies to meet the needs of Chinese physicians and patients. In this ensuing panel, we were fortunate to get an experienced group of MedTech executives who are currently and have a lot of experience operating in China, discussing the opportunities that are opening up for Western companies to more easily enter that huge market, while also talking about the steps that companies need to avoid in terms of finding potential partners, how to structure deals with Chinese partners, and also talking about some of the improvements in the regulatory and IP landscape that have made finding a reliable Chinese partner easier. So we hope you enjoy this latest edition of the Market Pathways podcast. You know, I go back to the last time when we were together. A couple years ago, we did a panel on China, and the focus was completely different. Back then, and again, just a couple years ago, the focus was on Chinese investors looking to invest in companies outside of China. And now, and the panelists may correct me, but it's kind of been a 180. You know, there's been a retrenchment in China, not as much money coming out of China, but the Chinese government realizes apparently they need innovative medical technology, and so they've changed the regulations. The NMPA has changed the regulations to create opportunities and make it perhaps easier, particularly for small and mid-sized companies, to enter the Chinese market. And another significant factor is this is occurring at the same time as MDR is being implemented, which we're going to talk about in a later panel this afternoon. And as a result of the confusion in Europe surrounding MDR, you have more companies that are starting to look at the US and even China perhaps before Europe when it comes to commercialization. So this panel is particularly relevant on a number of levels. And I can't think of better panelists to discuss this with. And let me start introducing on my far right, Ari Silverman from Mavi. And Ari, you'll talk a little bit about what Mavi is. Can I call you Pepe?
Of course.
Everybody calls Pepe Pepe. So, and Pepe has multiple experiences. Was CEO of Biosensors, and now is involved in Valiance, which is a UK venture firm. And Eliana from Zeltis, and I want you to start by telling us a little bit about Zeltis, because you're the classic example of what I was just alluding to, which is an innovative technology that the Chinese are looking to bring into their market. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the company so people know who Zeltis is?
Sure, more than happy to. So I'm the CEO and run a company called Zeltis. And what we have a platform technology that is a polymer, but the uniqueness is that the polymer can restore tissue, and at the same time as it's degrading. We're focusing on cardiovascular application, and today we have 5 clinical trials ongoing in 3 indications, 1 in a pediatric heart valve application. It's now currently in its pivotal phase. We have 2 vessel programs, one as a graft utilized for patients in chronic kidney disease that have to undergo dialysis, and therefore they need a shunt in their arm or anywhere to be on dialysis machines. But the same technology is also where we see a gigantic market if we can replace harvesting veins for coronary artery bypass grafts by utilizing our technology. And the technology is high science. It almost sounds like science fiction. The material degrades, but at the same time rebuilds your own tissue and therefore overcomes many, many problems. So it's a journey. It's quite a challenging journey. And as a CEO, I'm sort of signing up for constantly fundraising. And this is one avenue that we are pursuing.
And the exciting thing I think about this panel is that you are in the process, and we'll talk a little bit about how that process is played out, of entering the Chinese market. Pepe, of course, you've got experience, going back a while, and then you've worked with companies. Talk a little bit about Mavi for those who aren't familiar with Mavi, and then why don't you kind of give us an overview of what you see as the current climate in China now for MedTech companies that are looking to enter the Chinese market.
Okay, yeah, my pleasure. So Mavi, we are boutique investment bankers that focus exclusively on China cross-border MedTech. And we're very boutique, very focused, very niche. That's all we do. China cross-border MedTech. And we've seen, so just in terms of like what we're seeing right now, over the last few years, Chinese companies have really grown at scale. And so everything that we're doing and everything that we're seeing is all within the last 5, maybe 8 years or less. And what's happened is as Chinese players, as the big Chinese corporates and the funds have gotten large, they've also made a push towards innovation. And so again, in the last few years, you're seeing that Chinese players are now actively looking for innovation from the West that they can bring to China. And that's, I would say that's a relatively new phenomenon, which comes with all kinds of things around, in the last decade, or in the last 5 years even, a real acceleration around IP protection in the Chinese market, a real focus. And so with that, you're seeing, for the first time, real good quality partners that you can work with. And part of our business is helping companies bridge and to find those partners. And that's where I think, back to your introduction, like that's where I think that where we've seen that a lot of this opportunity is coming from. I will also say though that my sense of the market, while we've seen there's been a number of very successful deals. Pepe's done a few. He can talk about them, and there's been a lot of things happening. At the same time, I would say, just to be fair, that we're also seeing now some headwinds coming in on the market. So if you look at China in the last 6 months, market caps have been slashed by 30, 40%, even some 50%. And I would say, while maybe a year ago, I would say the deals were, we were seeing a lot of deal flow, and we still see a fair bit of deal flow. For the first time, we're seeing a little bit more caution. So, and I think what that is creating is an opportunity for the leaders are getting stronger and bigger, and a lot of like the middle layer that was going to come up is lacking the funds to become serious competitors. So in that sense, you're seeing like the winners and the strongers. The winners are getting stronger. And I think that's going to be helpful because you're going to see then even stronger potential partners access. The only other element I want to add, just one other thing, is another recent phenomenon is you're seeing now Chinese players actively looking for M&A. So maybe like if we had done this panel like 2-3 years ago, I would have talked only about licensing or an equity investment, maybe with a JV or a distribution deal, something like that. But there's been a few recent announcements on M&A. CardioFlow is an example. Wallaby just did one. And I would say when I talk to Chinese CEOs, whereas even like a year and a half ago, they were really just focused on innovation for home market. Now they're really starting to actively think not just China's still the main market, but they're now also thinking about how can they participate globally.
And I want to touch on structure a little bit later on, but you brought up what I think for many in this room is the 800-pound gorilla when you talk about entering the Chinese market, and that is IP protection. And you're starting to hear that things are improving. Maybe that's because some Chinese companies have technologies that they want to protect, so they've got a self-interest in that. But talk a little bit about that. And Eliana, since you're again in the process of just working through a deal, and you've got a very innovative technology, how important was it for you to get comfortable with the idea of being able to protect your IP?
Yeah, and this obviously is one of the main things that we discuss at board level, because board members and myself and the company are very careful, and you have to be, not naive in this. So I think what we have done is made a careful selection when to really take some money out of China, that you really know with whom you're dealing with. And I think this means you're not going to take the money from any company. You're going to be very careful on how professional is the company, how many deals have they done in the past. And what I've done is spent quite a lot of time is spending time with the CEOs that the company has done deals with outside of China to understand their experience. What have you learned? What have you seen? Are they really trustworthy? Are they? Is there anything on the IP that you see that is not, living up to expectations? And I think the credibility is very important. And for me, this was one of the reasons why I started to trust it. It's also true that in due diligence, they spend a lot of time on IP, right? They really want to understand every little bit. But at the same time, we're protective also. I mean, you better have your IP landing in with some of the larger players, then they're protecting, the IP for others better than what we should do probably ourselves.
Pepe, you've had a lot of experience going back to when you were running biosensors. Now you're involved with both HighLife and Yenivalve, two valve companies that are entering the Chinese market. How have you seen the kind of spectrum of IP protection in China? Has it improved to the point? Obviously, both of the companies you're involved with are, entering the Chinese market. What has happened that has increased your comfort level?
Yeah, I think that if you ask me, and this come back even all the way back to Gaiden and Abbott, if you partner with a local Chinese company, this is the best way to protect your IP, because they're not going to harm each other. So first of all, you need to have IP, because if you go into China with no IP, then there is a little bit like, okay, so where is your starting point? But if you have a strong IP that has been filed in China, and there are basically issued and valid patents there, if you are as an MNC, and this was also the fear, when we were at Abbott, and it's like, okay, we're gonna run MitraClip there, they're gonna copy it, we're gonna have science there, they're gonna copy it, and I tried to convince Miles at the time that there was a way to do business with China that involved partnering with China.
Miles White, head of
Miles White, the CEO of Abbott. And it didn't get traction in Abbott. We close to something, but it didn't work out because he was not confident doing that. What I saw when I moved to biosensors, obviously, was a different mindset in which you have a company that has already the experience of working with China. They have created a joint venture. They also acquired that joint venture. And we never had really any, at biosensors, we never had any consideration about they're going to copy our IP, somebody's going to use it, because we were having very strong financial partners in China. Also, the government doesn't want the Chinese companies go at each other. And so IP was not an issue.
Right.
So now when I move forward to the venture capital world now with multiple companies that they can do business in China, and basically in the VC world, you have US and Europe, and nobody look at China. And so when the company exit through an acquisition, the buyer, Medtronic, Abbott, Edwards, Boston, they need to start from scratch. And that means you lose the whatever 5 to 10 years span of the product development of the company that you could already have a partner in China. So to wrap up your question, IP, if it's managed properly with the right partner, it is actually it's actually the opposite. A strong partner in China will prevent from others to try to deal with your trying to overcome.
You also brought up an interesting point. It's talking about the need for a good Chinese partner. I think that's something that you hear uniformly. It's interesting though, because it's no secret that the leaders in the valve space, the strategics involved, are struggling in China and chose to go it alone. Talk about the difference in a strategic approach to entering a market like that versus, again, you're working with a couple startup companies, how they approach it in terms of working with a Chinese partner.
Again, I can give you a very clear example. I mean, it's like, okay, you need to identify what is the right partner for you, and it may not be the same for one company or another, okay? It doesn't necessarily need to be a strategic in China. It can be a right consortium financing package that is the right partner there. So it doesn't need to be somebody that is already in the space. Of course, if it's already in the space, it gives you the confidence that maybe technology transfer is going to be easier, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to your question around, how do you make sure that you are really advancing? And one example, we have the decision to really partner with somebody at High Life. I'm the chairman of High Life. It's a structural heart company developing a mitral replacement heart valve, transeptal, and there is no such thing in China. Mm-hmm. There are some startups, but there was no real play. And I'm not saying that we are further ahead than the startups that they're playing there. So we partner with Peja Medical to really bring this to practice. So I think we signed the deal in December 2020, and by December 2021, they have done first successful implant in China by themselves with the technology fully transferred. Now, when we talk with my friends at Abbott, Boston, Medtronic, I mean, it takes forever if you want to do it as an MNC. And nobody points you to why, but there are so many sticks in the wheel that you get through the process as an MNC to really get to the market there. So fast track to market is also a good partnership with China. So I'm an advocate for that.
All right, following up on the same question, what advice do you have for companies in the room that may be looking to enter the Chinese market? They know they need a Chinese partner. How do you find a reliable partner if you're not familiar with the market?
All right, first thing is talk to Ari, okay? Because I have to say, even though you could have argued, okay, I have already a joint venture in China, I know a lot of companies in China. When we started the process for High Life, I thought, if you think you know, you don't really know, and so we partnered with Ari and his partner Olivier to really make sure that we were not just concentrated on the friends and family that I knew from biosensors, but really to span and understand what is the landscape, what are the pros and cons of each of the partners for us and for them. Depends on the space, depends on the technology, depends on the status of financing. And then came out with a short list of 4 or 5 people that could all fit very well. It ended up being with Peja, but it could have been with, we had already another 2 or 3 partners that could have been great partners as well. And so that's the process. Now,
well, all right, let me just interrupt you, Pepe.
Thanks for listening so far. This interview will continue after this short message. Market Pathways is the #1 publication that covers the people, challenges, and opportunities impacting the global medical device regulatory, reimbursement, and policy spheres. MyStrategist.com is your digital home to access all of our coverage and read the latest issue of Market Pathways. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.
Generally, what advice do you have for companies that are looking to start the process, what rules of thumb have proven to be successful, in your advising of companies?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say, if you leave one thing from this session is, if you don't know already, figure out your China IP status and make sure that you're on top of that. Because a lot of companies have just either ignored it, or at the time it was not relevant, or even out of fear. So the first thing I'd say, I can't tell you, you heard from Eliane, it's true for every deal we've done, that there's been so much time spent on the IP, and just many companies haven't taken it seriously. So that I would say is step one. Just make sure you understand what your China, and if there's an issue, and you can fix it now. Then beyond that, I'd say there's some strategic questions that you need to answer with your board. First, about timing. When's the right time for you to come to China? And then you talked about structure. There's some structural questions. A question we get asked a lot is, what's the ideal structure? And obviously there is no ideal structure. I mean, there are a number of different types of deals that we've done. We do everything, just from straight licensing, like High Life. But there were other deals that we've done that are straight equity, Agicore, Robocath, and then there's all flavors in between, So it matters a lot on what are your strategic intentions for China and what you want to get out of the market, and obviously we can have that conversation, but I think that's important. Then the third thing I'd say is get your board aligned on what it is you're trying to achieve, because it's happened a few times where it's been our experience that board members may have had strong ingoing views one way or another. Some are extremely positive, maybe some are negative, maybe some have not had exposure. And I think it's very important to, even before you really take the China journey, that you understand where your board is coming from, that you understand if there are concerns that you can address them. I mean, China has changed a lot, and there are definitely some old myths that are still going around. And I think being able to get on top of those, and then being able to align your board on what is it you're trying to achieve. And I think if you do that, that's already terrific. The other thing I'd also mention, just again, observing, because we obviously help companies, but final decisions of partners are made by CEOs and boards. And one factor that definitely I've seen come up a lot is there's just something about personal fit. And I would have thought that would have been really difficult to figure out in this world of video conferencing, and nobody's flying to China anymore. And it's the longest time that I've been outside of China since 2006. And what I found though is that actually people can get pretty good impressions even just with all these video conferences. And companies have pretty strong views on what kind of culture and individuals fit, and that ended up, I've seen that way a lot in decisions even just beyond, because there are many very good Chinese companies that you could work with, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both, but I've seen a lot of times there's definitely something about fit through the process that comes down to.
We want to make this interactive, so if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, go to the microphone. In the meantime, as a sign of talking about the change that has taken place in China, Eliane, tell the story about how you met your Chinese partner. Now, we're not going to name the partner because you're in the middle of finalizing this deal, but I think it's a fascinating story, and also it kind of corroborates Ari's point that things really are changing in terms of how Western companies can find Chinese partners. Right,
absolutely. And for me, the situation is always, you look at different options to do the next fundraising, right? You look at classical VC routes, you look at strategics, you look at other types of classical funding routes. And then I spoke at the MedTech investment conference that was specific to cardiovascular propositions. And after that, I was approached by several Chinese partners. They said, okay, and then they started just high level, but then, it became already quite fast, real numbers that came over the, across the table, and I was quite surprised because I was not even considering China at that point in time already too seriously. So I presented it to the board, and the board has its skepticism, as we've heard, right? And they said, well, I'm not so sure. And then I pitched also the story that I do feel strongly if you are in the MedTech space and you know you're too early to be acquired or to have any, let's say, a true investment from a large strategic from Europe or the US, because simply they're pushing out their investment, they want to de-risk it more and more, then usually in the business plans, China is not part of the program. You're running a pivotal trial in Europe and the US, maybe you have some Asian sites, but usually you don't go through a full business plan which involves Chinese regulatory approval. You leave it for later, you see, okay, that happens later. Well, if there now is an opportunity to get earlier investment, potentially non-dilutive, potentially with an untapped market that you have not even considered in your plan, that could bring some benefits, and yes, maybe these royalties will not come, or too late, but at least it's there, and there could be some serious win in terms of accelerating your programs, not to be underestimated how important it is to recruit patients. And China is a gigantic market, and not that you can tap all of these patients out of China, but a portion of it is definitely acceptable, right, to get some patients out of China for a pivotal stage. So from that perspective, I think the board became to realize, okay, this might be interesting. Then we said, okay, let's not take the first offer that comes to the table, let's do a little bit more professional roadshow on this, and this is where we asked Mavi's help. And that happened, and very quickly we had several term sheets on the table. And the term sheet we picked was the one that also I spoke to at the very early investment conference. But to be honest, the deal that I signed for the term sheet has completely flipped to a different deal, the same company. But the intention that we had in mind was to do global developments by basically having funds available through this Chinese investor to support global programs. It also became very real when I started to really understand what are your global plans to really develop our products into China, that some of our thinking was not completely aligned. And then a deal like this becomes very complex. So this now turned into maybe a classical license deal, but still good, and still all the rest of the benefits that I mentioned still apply. Non-dilutive, fast, patients in China, and maybe untapped market that you never considered.
One question I hear a lot, kind of consistent with what you're listing, is the question of Chinese rights. So if you get a partner, whether you've got to give up Chinese rights, could you negotiate deals where at a certain point maybe you buy those rights back? Pepe, you've done a number of deals in China. Do you always have to give up rights? You know, what's been, and does it depend whether you were dealing with a financial buyer in China or a Chinese strategic?
Right. So, and I think you can have combination of everything. I mean, if I look at biosensors, this was already an established company, so the dynamics in China was a joint venture, and then biosensors acquired the 50% of the joint venture and became a fully owned subsidiary. Right? This is kind of like I was suggesting to Abbott, because it's a bit more amenable to have more full control, but maybe with partners that are local that become shareholders of the larger company. With High Life, and it worked extremely well, extremely well. In High Life, the discussion at the beginning started as let's go together and IPO in Hong Kong with different partners, even before you arrived. That was almost got to the finish line, but at the end it didn't work out. And then we retook it 2 years later. I think the timing was probably wrong. We took it 2 years later, and it became a license deal. But now, if you are working with a strategic in China, they would want to keep China. And so then the question is to have, for whoever is going to end up, I mean, High Life is going to end up being acquired by somebody, right? And so then we wanted to put a royalty back end on the deal, or a partnership, potential partnership agreement. So whoever is buying High Life will have a partner in China, right? Now, if you go with a financial institution, they don't care. And so perhaps then what you have is a buyback, multiple of investment rights. And they were accepted, actually, when we had the term sheet. You can argue 5x, 6x, but, if you're investing $100 million in China, there is a value. and that value can be realized. It's a bit more difficult if you do the partnership with Teja because they want to continue there. But all options are open, and I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win. I think that's the most important one, that it becomes a value creation exercise.
You know, we're coming right up against time. Ari, I'm going to give you the last word, but I also want you to comment on one point, which is that obviously the worst thing for any business is volatility. And, you know, if you look at the last few years in China, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. So for companies that are looking to China, do you see, and I'm not asking you to look into your crystal ball, but do you see the market having at least smoothed out to the point there are just reliable milestones that companies can rely on, or do you see the future as still having this potential level of ups and downs when it comes to risk?
Yeah, well, I want to
and feel free to comment on
it. Yeah, I just wanted to just very quickly, because it's a question we get a lot, and I think it's a terrific answer. I just want to emphasize from our experience, because a lot of the question we get is, you know, will taking on a Chinese partner hurt our exit options? And, you know, and I think what you just heard from Pepe, the answer is no. But also, and I share this because I just went through this experience in a deal that I'm working on, not with anyone on the stage, but a separate deal. And it was a particularly painful point because our client, you know, was insisting on a clawback clause. And I cannot emphasize how much I think that's a mistake. And just for a few reasons. First is, it's not really, if you're trying to create a partnership and build a business and you're trying to maximize value of what you're trying to achieve, telling your partner that your intention is to maybe pull back is not going to do well for your negotiation. And then I think the second thing is clawback clauses really work against you because you end up paying for them twice. You pay for them once when you negotiate it, because the partner's going to say, okay, well, now I have to discount the value of this deal based on the fact that you may take back the business, and I'm going to invest in it. But then second is you've now, you know, attributed a value number to China, which when you eventually exit, then your partner will say, okay, well, great, now there's a clawback clause. This is how much China's worth, and I'm going to deduct that from the deal. Whereas, you know, as Pepe is saying, if you have instead a royalty number, then actually that works far more financially favorable for them and for you. So, I mean, I could talk about this topic for hours, but I would just say...
well, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I know. So
give me the short version, the elevator pitch on what you see as far as future volatility.
Look, my opinion on this is there's volatility globally right now. And there's a lot of volatility everywhere. And it's true, you know, that China thrives on stability. So China does not like what's going on right now, you know, from a global perspective. And so that's obviously creating some concern. At the same time, at least look, from our perspective, we are still seeing lots of deal flow and lots of things happening. And, you know, despite, you know, there's lots of planning and uncertainty, there's always planning and uncertainty. And in that sense, things are moving forward. But, you know, I would say when I talk about the headwinds, I think the global situation is not without its risks for, you know, what the future holds. And I think that's true not in China. I think that's true around the world.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank the panel. It's been a and no, there's a question. I apologize.
Yeah, my name is Changhong Whitney. My company, Whitney Consulting, is specialized in Chinese medical device regulations. So I would like to make some comments, if that's okay.
Okay.
I'm very happy to hear the last speaker talking about China thrive in volatility. I totally agree. But then at the same time, though, there are also other opportunities that everybody here should be able to leverage, which is from the regulatory approval process. There's a track called Medical Device Innovation Track. That's the one for technology that's new in the world. No market has approved, and it's new in China. China would give you a special access to reviewers for this kind of device. So that's called innovation track. The other comment I want to make is on IP. I really do encourage everybody here, get your IP, get your patent filed in China. Do not believe that if you have a partner, your IP will be protected. I have seen those so many times that I feel that it's important for everybody in this room, in this conference, to get your IP protected in China no matter what. Get the patent filed, and then you can also access this breakthrough innovation track as well. And the other thing is working with Chinese companies, you know, getting your getting your technology over to China, have a partner is one thing, but the other second question you need to ask your potential partner is this device going to be, how is it going to be paid for? Reimbursement. In China, reimbursement is by province, meaning every single province someone have to go get their application for it. So a lot of the revenue doesn't come in. It's not because company cannot sell it. It's because the physicians or the hospital cannot get the money back, and therefore that hinders your sales. So all of those, there are a lot of little nooks and crannies in China that I think are worth understanding. I totally agree with this lady in the front is talking about strategy. You understand the strategy, but at the same time, the strategy does not come just say, okay, we're going to China. China is very, very special. I've been in this business for 30 years. I have a company there. Our primary business is helping international business. So I've seen all this activities so many times, mistakes being made, but I definitely feel like everybody here should get your IP protected, please, and then you can access all the other things and also help yourself protected.
Well, that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. And let's thank the panelists. It was a fascinating discussion. Really appreciate everybody. We hope you enjoyed this latest edition of the Market Pathways podcast on the MedTech market in China. For other Market Pathways podcasts, or to find out more about either of our publications, Market Pathways or MedTech Strategist, please go to our website, medtechstrategist.com. And we look forward to have you joining us for future Market Pathways podcasts. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.